Today we are going to talk about historical fiction. Like its brothers, the adaptation and the sequel, it's hard to pull it off because the story is directly related to a pre-existing story. I like to believe, however, the stakes are higher in historical fiction than they are in, say, adaptations or sequels, especially in film. If you mess up an adaptation, you insult fans of the original. If you mess up historical fiction, you are insulting real people. There's a lot that can go wrong, which is why there aren't that many gray areas. There are great historical fiction movies, staying true to history while holding up on their own merits. And then we have movies like Anastasia. Directed by Don Bluth, Anastasia is a 1997 animated movie about Russian history. I realize that a lot of people love this movie. I realize that this movie was well received by critics, but personally I cannot stand Anastasia. To me, this film combines bad historical fiction, bad musicals, and bad animated kids movies all in one horrible combination. This movie tries to tell the story of the Duchess Anastasia, but fails miserably. But before we go into that, let's talk about a more recent history. The year was 1997, and Disney's animation studio was not doing very well. Naturally, other animation studios took this as an opportunity to cash in on the money and notoriety Disney received in the Disney Renaissance. In the late 90s, we saw a lot of Disney knockoff movies. One of the first was Anastasia. In the Russian Revolution, the Tsar and royal family were executed by a secret faction of the government. It wasn't until later when people noticed that the body of the Princess Anastasia was never found. This immediately led to rumors that she was alive and living among the common folk. This movie asks what would have happened if she really did survive, but royally screws it up. How? 4 words. Rasputin the evil sorcerer. Rasputin was a friend of the royal family. He was rumored to be a wizard, but he wasn't evil and most certainly didn't cause the Russian Revolution all by himself. According to the movie, however, he was a power-hungry villain who sold his soul to the devil and tried to kill the entire Romanov family with a curse, which sparked the revolution. The revolution killed the whole Romanov royal family, except for Anastasia and her grandmother, a non-Romanov who ruled France. They escaped with the help of a servant boy named Dimitri, but Anastasia got separated from her grandmother and went missing. This isn't just stupid, it is pointless. This villain could have been removed from the entire plot and wouldn't have changed the whole story that much at all. You could have removed the wizard and have Anastasia and her grandmother escape from an angry mob and get separated then. Even if you needed an evil sorcerer, you could have just made somebody up. You deliberately chose to change the actions and characteristics of real people. Don't you think that might have been a little bit offensive to the people who died in this bloody and unpleasant revolution? This movie not only offended Russian historians, it offended contemporary descendants of the Romanov family. I mean, at least Pocahontas had the courtesy to mess up an event that happened 400 years prior. When Anastasia was made, the event wasn't even a century old. There were people alive at the time who were there when it happened. And for all we knew back then, Anastasia herself could have still been alive. Historical fiction is hard to make for kids, mainly because of the restrictions placed upon children's films. Usually, if a time is interesting enough to write stories about, it's because the situation is uncomfortable. Because of this, studios usually sugarcoat things, and this ends up badly. But this doesn't mean that animated historical fiction is dead on arrival. We've seen it work in the past, and from the same director, no less. So, what were they thinking? The worst part is that they kept the darkest aspect of the story, the death of the royal family, in the movie. What was the point of changing the cause of the revolution if the royal family dies anyway? This was pointless. This was just insulting. You know, as bad as this movie is as historical fiction, it should be judged by itself, so let's try to ignore the historical inaccuracies and look about how this holds up as a movie. Let's start out with the music. This movie is way too liberal with the musical numbers, and that gets annoying fast. But the soundtrack itself is actually okay. I mean, it's no Lion King, but has one or two good songs. My favorite is the movie's poster song of sorts, Once Upon a December. The musical number for this song is by far the greatest moment in the movie. The arrangement is good, and the visuals are truly stunning. And speaking of visuals, the animation in the movie is excellent. Don Bluth usually delivers in that aspect, but the character design and especially the backgrounds are shameless rip-offs of Disney. We have Ariel, I mean Anastasia, Thomas, I mean Dimitri, and Jafar, I mean Rasputin. If I were to compare the background design to any movie, it would be either Beauty and the Beast or Hunchback of Notre Dame. Ahem. Bluth really did his homework. This movie is so aesthetically and thematically identical to Disney that most of the people I've talked to about this movie were surprised when I told them that it wasn't a Disney movie. The problem with trying to rip off Disney is that it's hard to do Disney right if you aren't Disney yourself. Heck, it's hard for Disney to pull off Disney most of the time. There's more to Disney than princesses and sorcery, so you can't just throw in cliches and expect a masterpiece. But enough of the details. Let's get right into the meat of the movie. How are this movie's characters? This movie has a relatively small cast, so we only really have 3 major characters, each with a funny little sidekick, or not so little in Dimitri's case. The first is Anastasia, mostly referred to in this movie as Anya. Why? Because she got amnesia. How? She hit her head. Head trauma does not always cause amnesia, filmmakers. Stop acting like it does! 10 years later, Anastasia, now Anya, wants to find her family, not remembering any of her life as a royal. The only clue she has is a pendant her grandmother gave her as a child that says "Together in Paris." So, with the help of a cute little dog she just finds, she sets off for France. The writers were obviously trying to emulate Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and in my opinion, they actually did okay. It's not exact, but I like what they did with her character. She's intelligent, resourceful, and toughened from years of being an orphan. Meg Ryan gives a really good performance. Turns out she can play characters other than the Meg Ryan stock character after all. This is a strong, well-made character. Her motivations are clear, and she works into the narrative well. In other words, she is the complete opposite of Rasputin. Rasputin is one of the worst villains I've seen in any children's film. I mean, if you rip off Disney, you need to make a good villain. They are good at making villains. Not only is he a walking insult to history, even though he is pointless in the villain sense, because he has almost no bearing on the plot. When Anastasia escaped, Rasputin died and was sent into limbo by the dark forces. When Rasputin finds out 10 years later that Anastasia is still alive, and is going to Paris with the con artist Dimitri, he sends these weird glowy bat things to kill her twice, and is stopped both times. He has almost no bearing on the plot, and Anya isn't even made aware of him until the last 10 minutes of the movie. This is bad enough, but he is also poorly written. There are scary villains, and there are campy villains. The writers try to make Rasputin both, but he ends up being neither. In fact, the only good thing he brings to this whole movie is the villain song, which is surprisingly fun and catchy. I guess I should also bring up Bartok, the Iago to Rasputin's Jafar. He is annoying because of how painfully, I repeat, painfully unfunny he is. Hank Azaria is no Gilbert Gottfried, to say the very least. And lastly, we have Dimitri. His deal is that he is a con artist. He and his sidekick plan to take a girl that looks like Anastasia and use her to get the award that Anastasia's grandmother offered. He finds Anya, and even though he practically grew up with the princess, doesn't realize that they are the same person. He does realize, however, that she would be good for his con. And you know the plot from here. He starts off just using her, but then they fall in love, but then the plan is revealed later, and then blah blah blah. We've seen it a billion times. And we'll get to that later. Then we have his personality. If Anya was meant to emulate Belle, Dimitri was meant to emulate Aladdin.
And while I don't think the writers got as close as they did with Anya, they still got close enough. In a weird way, this movie seems to be more about him than it is about her. The story revolves around the con plan and the relationship between the two, which is mostly told through the point of view of the con artist. My only real problem is that fact that his voice actor sounds a good 15 years older than Dimitri, who I think is supposed to be like 19. I kind of like the conversations Dimitri and Anya have, because it sounds like something two teenagers would actually say to each other.
Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot.
Well, I think we did too.
Okay.
But I appreciate your apology.
Apology? Who said anything about an apology? I was just saying
Please,
that
just
we...
don't talk anymore, okay? It's only gonna upset me.
Fine. I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet if you will.
All right, I'll be quiet.
Fine.
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 You might notice that I say a lot of good things about this movie. I have, and the animation, the music, and the main characters aren't my problem with this movie. My biggest problem is that, the plot thingy. Yeah, the thing about writing screenplays is that you need to do your best to keep the situation and decisions made by the characters grounded in emotional reality, even if the story is fantasy or sci-fi or what have you. If you don't do that, it's hard to be invested. It seems that none of the 5 writers took this into consideration.
This movie pulls a lot of plot threads out of nowhere for the sole purpose of creating obstacles for Anya and Dimitri, the biggest of which, of course, being Rasputin. But we've been through that. There are more. The most noticeable one is definitely the fact that Dimitri tries to trick Anya. He doesn't know that Anya is Anastasia until the 3rd act, even though he should. He just thinks that Anya is a strong look-alike, and only acts like he thinks Anya is Anastasia to get her to come with them to Paris to show her to Anastasia's grandmother, who offered a 10 million ruble reward for the return of Anastasia. Anya, to some extent, knows that the whole thing is just charade, but what Dimitri doesn't tell her is the reward. Why? He could have just said, hey, we have a plan to trick the queen into thinking we found Anastasia. You look like her, and we'll give you a third of the reward money if we can pull it off. We need an Anastasia doppelganger to come with us to Paris, and you need a ride to Paris. We can help each other out. That would have made it all so much easier. The only reason why the writers didn't add that is so that the lie can be revealed to Anya right when the two of them fall in love, and Dimitri realizes that Anya really is Anastasia and has to prove to both Anya and Anya's grandmother that it's true. It's funny how the screenplay is doing all in its power to make Anya and Dimitri's relationship a Meg Ryan movie. The ending of this movie is horrible. It has all the cliches. The villain tries to kill the hero in a very slow and inefficient way. The hero looks like they're going to die, but is saved by another character. The hero thinks that other character is dead. Except here they don't even attempt to make it look realistic.
Dimitri!
How long was that? Like, 1 second? Quick to jump to conclusions, are we? Oh, he's dead. This is for Dimitri! The hero says a speech, but the villain just sits there. The villain dies a gruesome and bloodless death. And we have the scene where we think the character is dead, and so they just wake up, which has been a cliche since the beginning of storytelling, and the lovebirds kiss, or in this case, almost kiss. And then, instead of going back to Russia to save the people from communism, Anastasia and Dimitri run away together. How nice. I hate this movie. It's nonsensical, flimsy, inaccurate, and doesn't take its audience seriously. But the thing that sucks the most is that this movie could have been great. And that's because the nucleus of the plot, the love story, is really good. This could have risen above and beyond to be remembered as one of the great animated movies with the likes of Beauty and the Beast, The Iron Giant, or The Secret of NIMH, which, as I might remind you, was directed by Don Bluth. Don Bluth's 4 previous movies all tanked, both financially and critically. When 1997 came around, Bluth just gave up, and it paid off. Anastasia was a success both financially and, somehow, critically. But at least I can take comfort in knowing that he never had a movie more shameless a ripoff than this one. Oh no.